Well, good evening and welcome everyone to the American Cetacean Society, San Francisco Bay Chapter's September 2024 speaker event. And I'm Susan Hopp, board member responsible for our speaker program. And with me is fellow board member Wade Cobb and fellow board member Susan Sherman. So for anyone new to the American Cetacean Society, we are a chapter within a national organization that is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to the protection of whales, dolphins, porpoises, and their habitat. And we do this through education, community engagement, and awarding grants towards cetacean research. So we appreciate your donations in support of our mission. They do fund our research grants and expenses for these talks. And it's very easy to donate on our website if you haven't at the time of registration. So thank you. All right, a couple quick announcements before we get to our topic at hand. Our new online class, The Gulf of the Greater Farallones and Its Habitats, is now in its third week out of 6 and going strong under the tutelage of Susan Sherman and Mark Weber, both board members. And we're already getting requests for dates when we will offer it again. So please keep this class opportunity on your radar for next year. And the other announcement regards our research grants. We will be announcing the application details in October for our 2024 grant. And in our October 22nd talk, we're really thrilled that our most recent grantee, Dr. Nico Ransom, will be presenting her research and study of a distinct population of humpback whales that migrate between Central and North Pacific. Okay, so we're recording this session, and please put your questions in the Q&A, and after the presentation, we'll do our best to get to them. So our focus tonight is on the Bigg's killer whales of the Pacific Northwest. And based on the number of registrations for tonight's talk, there is a lot of interest in this population, and likely our speaker's reputation precedes him. We are very happy to welcome Jared Towers. Jared is the executive director of Bay Cetology based in Vancouver, British Columbia. His work primarily revolves around studying the movements, behavior, abundance, and ecology of cetacean populations using direct observations and remote sensing technology. He typically spends over 100 days a year at sea conducting field research on killer whales in both hemispheres. But he's also been involved in studies on minke, humpback, fin, sei, blue, gray, right, and sperm whales in the North Pacific, South Atlantic, Indian, and Southern Oceans. Jared manages several killer whale population data sets, helps advise and direct a number of cetacean research and conservation organizations in North America, has published several scientific articles, and in addition to conducting conservation-based field research, also responds to cetacean incidents such as entanglements, entrapments, and strandings. And I know we're going to hear a lot about that tonight. So it's just really exciting to get up close and personal with you, Jared, who's been so involved with this. So thank you for being here, and I hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you for that lovely introduction, Susan. I appreciate it, and thank you for everyone that's here tonight. It's glad to see you've got a full webinar here. So I will just jump right into it. I'll share my screen here and bring up a presentation, and we'll take it from there. And if you can just let me know if you can see this okay.
Looks good.
Okay, well, so when I was first asked to do this presentation, there was a lot of interest in this little killer whale here in this photo named kʷiisaḥiʔis. And I was asked to put a story together regarding this individual's response effort that I was very much involved in earlier this year when this killer whale was entrapped in a lagoon. And I've been involved in a number of other entrapment type situations with killer whales from this population, but we've got 45 minutes or so, so I'm going to talk a little bit about these different situations, as well as some technology that my team and I have been working on developing for the last few years for tracking killer whales. And we'll also just talk a little bit about Bigg's killer whales in general. So my name is Jared, and I'm the executive director of Cetology, as Susan mentioned. I'm also an employee of Fisheries and Oceans Canada as and when required, and have been for the last 18 years. So a lot of this work with Bigg's killer whales is something that I'm doing on behalf of one or the other or both organizations. A little bit of background about myself. I'm based in Alert Bay. That's also known as home of the killer whale in the traditional territory of the Numgis First Nation. And this area around Alert Bay is considered critical habitat for the northern resident killer whale population. And I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time here as a kid. My parents owned one of the first whale watching companies in Canada. And it was on this sailboat that I spent a lot of time as a kid looking at northern resident killer whales in the 1980s and 1990s. And if we skip a lot of other stuff and fast forward to the future or the present, at least, I now spend a lot of time in this boat along the coast of BC, working on especially killer whales, northern residents, and Bigg's killer whales, but also blues and rights and humpbacks and a variety of other species here, in addition to taking up contracts for cetacean research in different parts of the world, primarily focused on killer whales. And that kind of leads us to back to the photo identification, because really this is the kind of work that underpins so much of what we know about wild cetacean populations. And I have a slide here of Dr. Paul Spong from the late 60s. And Dr. Spong was working with some captive killer whales, and he quickly realized that these animals didn't belong in tanks. And he moved his studies out to the wild, which was unheard of at that time in 1970. And the individuals that he saw in 1971, he noted were the same as the ones he saw in 1970, indicating that these animals were very easily recognizable in the wild. And it was around this time that the public, both in British Columbia and throughout the west coast of the US, started questioning whether or not there was enough killer whales for them to continue to be captured. And the Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, as it was called then, hired Dr. Mike Bigg to try and count these whales. They had no idea how he was going to do it, and neither did he. But he started looking at photography as a way to do this, and really pioneered the study of photo identification to count killer whales. And what he quickly found was that there simply wasn't enough to justify a live capture trade. And with the help of Graham Ellis, they continued to catalog all these killer whales for decades and decades. And I've been helping continue this work forward since my involvement. Not only as a younger person, I was contributing film to their studies back when I was a kid, but professionally now for a couple decades. And of course, now we're using digital. We're photographing rights and left sides and eye patches, and we're taking it a step further by developing machine learning algorithms to help expedite this work. Because considering how much data we have, it does take my team and myself a lot of time to keep up to date with all this data. So for those of you not familiar with photo identification specifically, this is just an example of how effective it can be when you're looking at unique identifying features on large mammals like killer whales. This is a photograph of Mike Biggs from 1982 of T23 on the left, the same individual in 2024, 42 years later, on the right by Gary Sutton. And you can see all those little scars on the saddle patch, in addition to the nick in the dorsal fin, are virtually unchanged, highlighting exactly how useful photo identification can be, especially for adult killer whales. One of the things we do with all this information is remain pretty consistent in our understanding of the social dynamics and cohesiveness of family groups. And we can reconstruct family trees quite easily because we've been following these individuals for decades now. And this group in particular is the T46s, and T46 just died last year. Unfortunately, she was actually captured in the late 70s down in Washington, but she was let go. And after that, she gave birth to a variety of different females. And each one of her female offspring, other than her first surviving female offspring, T122, dispersed when they started having their own kids. And to the day she died, she was joined by her sons, T46D and T46E. So a fairly cohesive social unit, but not quite as cohesive as resident killer whales because females and even sometimes males do disperse. All this data that we do get from photo identification goes into a database, which includes the date and the month, or at least year, month, and day, location, and all the individual IDs. We've now got over 9,000 encounters in this database, which is a lot of work to keep up to date with. And there's a registry for every killer whale, a form, which includes basically everything we know about it. And because all these fields are exportable and queryable, it's very easy to narrow down exactly what you're looking for at any given moment, which is the beauty of having databases and why it's so important to keep track of these individuals in such a way rather than just looking at photos as they come in. When you look at it all together, you can create a graph like this, just highlighting how things have changed over the years with this study from the early 70s up to almost the present. And you can see that the number of encounters is, we're dealing with over 500 encounters a year now from data contributors up and down the coast. Each one of those encounters has sometimes hundreds of photos to go through. We've got about 100 data contributors annually. It really fluctuates, but it's about there. And the unique number of individuals identified each year has also been rising, not only because we have more contributors and more encounters, but also because the population has been growing. And we're photographing collectively about 350 individuals a year, which is amazing considering these animals were rare enough when I was a kid that everybody would get excited when they showed up because it might be the only time all year that you would see transient killer whales, also now known as Bigg's killer whales. And looking at this graph, this is a bit of a discovery curve showing the number of individuals identified first as adults. And the interesting thing about this is that individuals in this West Coast transient population of Bigg's killer whales are continually being discovered. Unlike resident killer whales, we don't discover new ones in the southern residents or northern residents unless they're babies. The blue line basically indicates babies, and the green line indicates that, yeah, every year we are finding just a few more individuals, indicating that we're not exactly sure how big this population is, but that it, at least so far as we know, is continuing to grow each year at about 4%, which is amazing. All this really kind of comes together to give us a good knowledge of the majority, or at least the more common individuals in this population that we see along the coast, right, from California up to Alaska. We can put together a distribution and population status as well as photo identification catalog, and just these few other papers I'll show you are just ones that I've been involved in the last 4 years alone. There's another one looking at live strandings of Bigg's killer whales, which has really helped inform our understanding of further live strandings, which have happened since this was published, because there are some similarities to all of them, which are really helpful when it comes to managing these situations. We found a lot about the sexual selection in this population and mating strategies because of unique behaviors that they're sometimes involved in, and we also know that they have very long post-reproductive lifespans, at least females do, and we are one of only a few species on this planet that is known for such a thing, in addition to killer whales and just a few other species of odontocetes cetacean, indicating that the way that our species have evolved have had some major similarities. And that makes us very much alike in a lot of ways that what makes us very different from a lot of other animals, which is perhaps why we identify so much with these animals, known as orcas or killer whales or blackfish. We also have used our data to build machine learning algorithms or artificial intelligence to help expedite the process of photo identification. And of course, we're always looking at social dynamics in this population. So these are just some of the bigger works that we've been involved with using these data over the last few years. But you might ask, why is it important to know all these things? And I think what it really comes down to is that we share a lot of the same part of the world with these animals. They'll swim right into Nanaimo Harbor, Victoria Harbor, Vancouver Harbor, Seattle, and we're always crossing paths with these animals, and you can't miss them. And they're really fascinating. So, we share a lot of the same waters. They're exposed to a lot of threats in these areas, like military sonar, for example. There's recreational traffic and physical disturbance from time to time, including the odd vessel strike. There's chronic noise, which may occasionally interfere with their ability to socialize or hunt. There's also industrial impacts from things like logging, shipping, fish farms. We're not exactly sure of the effects of climate change on this population or if there are any yet, but we're certainly feeling those ourselves in some places at certain times of the year, and it's something that may turn out to be a challenge for the West Coast transient population of Bigg's killer whales. And these are all impacts that their prey are also facing. And so we have to be cognizant of that because these whales, even though we're not sure exactly how big the population is, it probably only numbers in the hundreds, which of course is a relatively small population as far as abundance is concerned. And when it comes to prey, because West Coast transient killer whales are feeding high on the food chain because they only eat mammals as opposed to fish, like northern and southern residents, you can see that they bioaccumulate toxins at much higher levels. So between all sex and age classes, they're far more contaminated with PCBs or PBDEs and other persistent organic pollutants than northern residents or southern residents are, both back in the 90s as well as up to the late 2010s when these two different studies took place. So considering that these animals face a lot of threats, they're small in population abundance, and we are generally very interested and concerned about them. And because we know all these individuals, or at least a majority of them, very, very well, and have since, for the most part, since every individual in the population was born, or at least 90% of them or so. When it comes to things like entrapments, even if these cases are naturally occurring, there's a lot of people that can't help but want to help these animals, and I'm definitely one of those people. And so I'm going to talk to you a bit about some of the responses to entrapment type scenarios that I've been involved in the last decade or so. And a colleague of mine, Ev Jourdain, described an entrapment as a situation where a killer whale finds itself in which it cannot get out of for any unknown reason. And these are the kind of cases where which I'll be talking about over the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. So this one was in July 2013. A couple colleagues of mine, John Ford and Graham Ellis, went to anchor their boat in a very remote part of the BC coast. And they found in this small anchorage a young killer whale by itself, and they took some photos of it. And then another colleague, Lance Bear Leonard, came in a couple days later and took some photos and got an eye patch photo of it, and sent them along to me, and I was able to confirm that from the dorsal fin that this was one of three individuals. It was kind of hard to narrow it down, but the eye patch really nailed it down as T46C2. And this individual was born in 2009, so it was about 2.5 or 3.5 years old, and it had been known from 11 encounters previous to it turning up alone in this small bay. So the site profile of this area and it's hard to pick out here, but it's basically right in the middle of the screen. You can see a small body of water that's white in color. It's got a little cross right at the top of it, indicating a little rock, and it's kind of in the top center of the screen. That's the anchorage, and you can see that that whale could have swam out and through some very shallow waters to the west or even to the southeast. But over the course of the next few days and the next couple of weeks, in fact, this whale just stayed in this area and began to get emaciated. It was making distress calls to the point where we had to turn the hydrophone off because it was getting pretty upsetting to listen to. And so we knew we had to act fast because we didn't know how long that whale had been in there since before it was first found, given it was such a remote part of the coast. But we did notice that after just over 2 weeks of monitoring that it was starting to get pretty serious. So what we did was build a hukilau. And a hukilau is something that you have a floating line. You can make it float with floats, or just have some kind of polypropylene line, string it between two people on shore or two people in boats. And along that line, you have some sinking line or chain and or little weights on the line to keep it down in the water. So picture like a beaded curtain or a Hawaiian grass skirt, and something that a whale could swim through very easily. But for whatever reason, killer whales are terrified of these things for the most part, and other dolphins are as well. They're very foreign, and they don't like them. And in this case, we built one, and we just got each end of the hukilau in the Zodiac and two Zodiacs, and swam or carried on motored towards the exit channel, which was pretty narrow. And this little whale, T46C2, just popped right out. And we didn't see her again for some time, but when she was photographed next, she was with her auntie. And then when she was photographed next, she was with an unrelated pod. And then the next time, about a year later, she was back with her family. And so we figured this was a pretty successful response in the end. And since then, this whale has bounced around a lot. She left her family, she turned up alone, and now she's traveling with her niece and her niece's kids. And she's a healthy young adult female that's been seen 80 times since 2013 after we helped her get out of that bay. So that's a good news story. The other one was several years later in Comox Harbor, and this was very different. This was in July 22nd when this whale swam into the Comox Harbor area. And based on some photos that were taken, we were able to figure out this was T73B. You can see the similarities in the saddle patch and the dorsal fin shape. This animal was born in about 1991 and was known from 59 encounters up until the point that it was in the harbor. So it was a pretty well-known individual, mostly photographed up in Southeast Alaska. But when you look at the profile of Comox Harbor, you can see this massive entrance. And that's why we weren't too worried about this. We were kind of just monitoring it loosely and thinking this whale would leave. But this whale didn't leave. He continued to traverse along the very shallow edge of the estuary, back and forth, pacing back and forth, routinely all the time for days. And he even went up the river. And when the tide goes out, this river almost completely dries. And so we're kind of concerned about stranding risk. But even more so, we were concerned about the fact that this was such a busy harbor. There's paddle boarders, sometimes dozens of them, kayakers, small zodiacs. There's a sailing fleet, and just boats coming and going all the time. And that's not a huge concern, but this whale was starting to get bored, and he started to play with crab pots, and that was a bit of a concern. I'm just going to mute the audio here, but when I was down there, you could see that this whale was just grabbing onto this line from this crab pot and swimming around with it. And over the course of about 4 or 5 minutes, he moved this crab pot about 300 meters. And that's not unusual for Bigg's killer whales, especially lone males, to play with crab pots, but it escalated. And the next day, this whale grabbed onto the anchor chain of a sailboat. There's no audio with this video, so I'll just keep on talking here. But he played with it for a while. He started to move the boat around. You may have seen this on YouTube or on the news when it was happening in 2018. And he just would swim around with this sailboat and just took off with it. There's other people anchored on their sailboat watching this happen. And then T-73B towed the sailboat right into theirs and caused some damage. And when the two collided, he had a conniption and did a tail breach out of the water. And yeah, so at that point, I made some phone calls and said, we got to do something because we've had a situation off the other coast of Vancouver Island back in the early 2000s with a young whale named Luna, which was interacting with boats a lot. And this whale is about 4 to 5 times the size of Luna, and he was getting quite comfortable with boats and people. And we also had nautical days coming up in Comox, which is a fireworks display with hundreds of boats on the water. So we thought that perhaps the most elegant approach might be to do a playback experiment just to see if that might entice them out. And I happened to make a recording of some good friends of this whale, the T-77s, a couple years previous, and thought that this might be the group to play to him. And as soon as we made the playback, I waited until he was near the exit, or at least in line with the exit to the harbor, and then instructed the boat on the other side to do the playback. And as soon as they played that sound, he shot out of the harbor, doing about 12 knots right towards them. And it was kind of a windy day, and he just took off. We caught up to him. He started breaching. You could see actually these indents along his chin here, right underneath the gape, as well as in front of the pecs, where you can see a line abrasions or chain abrasions from the floats and boats that he was playing with. Anyways, he took off. So he was entrapped there for almost a couple weeks, and he's been recited 18 times since then, including in Haida Gwaii here with this deer. So last fall, I got a message from some colleagues at NOAA in Alaska, asking if I could ID these two whales that swam into Barnes Lake on August 17th. And this is one of them, T51, known since he was born around 1987, 46 encounters, not a very well-known whale, but well-known enough. And another one, they didn't have a great photo here, but we were able to figure out this was T49A2, very well-known individuals, born in 2007, photographed 171 different occasions since then. And looking at our database, we knew that these two whales had been seen only in July 9th off the west side of Vancouver Island by Marcy Calawart heading north. So we were able to deduce that they'd been together for a while. The profile of this site is a fair bit different than the Comox Harbor entrapment. You've got two very narrow exit channels which have tidal rapids in them, and the village of Kaufman Cove over to the right here, and Barnes Lake down here on the left. Very narrow, very, very shallow, only slack tide for a very short window of time each day. We're talking like 10, 15, 20 minutes max, and only a few days a month where you can actually hope to get a killer whale in and out of there. So we timed our response for late September. At this point, these whales had been entrapped for over 5 weeks. We had about half the community of Kaufman Cove show up to help. Dave Bain came up with our student Chloe Kotick, and we have a bunch of colleagues, a couple colleagues from NOAA there, and just a great group of people. We built a hukilau, and that was I already described how that works. Put it in the boat. Now we had a bunch of okumi pipes, another response method to bang on these pipes and drive the animals away from the sound source if necessary. And we had a whole bunch of boats. So we got in before slack tide. We thought that based on the success we had with playbacks, we would use that approach first. It seemed like the least disturbing and most effective. And this is what we played back. And that was a recording of some travel companions unrelated to these whales, a group of females. It's an older recording, but whales that also like to hang out in Alaska, like these two guys do. And this was a response we got. We have no idea what any of these calls mean, so very experimental stuff here. Whatever they meant, they were interested. T49A2 started breaching, and they both started coming right towards the boat. And as I watched them come towards the other two boats, two of them started putting out the hukilau behind them, and they came into the exit channel at this point. The tide was running pretty hard, and then T51, who was the first into the channel, got so weighted down with kelp, and he just turned and did a 180 and powered his way back out of the exit channel. Unfortunately, you can see a lot of the kelp on him. His pecs were probably loaded with it as well. There was so much in that channel. And they went right around the Hukilau and back into the lake. And we needed to get out of there because we had rapids forming and the water was dropping really quick. So we kind of were deflated at this point. We regrouped, came up with a different plan, and we figured we would get the Hukilau in place at the southeast exit channel instead of the north exit channel, because although it was shallower, narrower, it had less kelp. And we thought we'd give that a try. And I should mention there was okumi pipes there too on the previous day's response, and they swam around the hukilau and right through the okumi pipes, and so we know that these methods are less effective the more exposure they get. So we didn't even know if anything would work the next day. We were feeling a bit deflated, as I mentioned, but when we we made the playback right before slack tide. And the whales were unfortunately on the other side of the lake, but we got almost an immediate response. So the first part of this recording is the playback, and the second part is you can hear not only the second call in the playback, but overlapping with it, one of the whale's responses.
Hey, Jared, sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
You know, we are not hearing any of the recordings.
Hmm. I'm
So,
sorry to hear that. I got them playing full blast here, and my mic's near the speaker, but it may be that it's not hearing it because the speaker and my mic are in the same machine or something.
well, it's a beautiful visual.
Okay. Yeah, well, at least you've got the visual. You can imagine what's going on. I've only got one more recording, and I'll play it here for you anyways, and I'll throw the volume up all the way just in case. Anyways, this was a response of these whales, if you can hear it. So they were pretty excited, and it would be more interesting to hear if we knew what they were saying, but we have no idea what they were saying. So I'm not sure it makes any difference. But these whales were heading right towards us at about 7 or 8 knots, and we started up and got the speaker out of the water and went into the exit channel ahead of them. There's no sound associated with this video, and it's sped up 400%. But if you watch the heads on these whales, you can see that they're moving their necks around, they're looking around, maybe trying to find the source of those sounds, looking for other whales, or maybe they're just navigating their way through the shallows because we led them to the exit channel. And even though this is sped up 400%, they are moving really quick. As you can see, it is slack tide and really shallow, but they just carried along right behind us on this double S turn. It took about 15 minutes for them to get out. And once they were out past the old maple tree here and back out into open water, yeah, nearly 6 weeks had passed since these whales first swam into that area. They were pretty healthy, mind you, but the reason we responded is because you can only get in and out of there only a few times each month safely. Winter was coming. There wasn't going to be many people around in Kaufman Cove to give them a hand, and we don't expect that they would have survived in there unless they found their own way out. But there have been killer whales trapped in Kaufman Cove in the 1990s at I think 5 out of 6 or 7 out of 8 individuals were led out by Dave Bain and others using okumi pipes. Those were offshore killer whales, and they were very emaciated by the time they got out, and one of them actually died in the lagoon, probably from starvation. So yeah, we got them out. And since then, T49A2 has been seen 11 times, and T51, not in this photo, has been seen 4 times, including both right off Alert Bay as well as down in Puget Sound, where some of the other folks that helped with that response live. They were actually just seen together right near Barnes Lake about a week ago as well. They weren't in the lake, thankfully, but they were nearby. So they're back together at the moment. So that leads us to this most recent case of entrapment, which was very well publicized, a lot of media attention. It was a bit of a different scenario in many ways, and very challenging in a lot of ways. I was on site for 5 weeks myself. It all began on March 23rd when T109A3 live stranded and then drowned when the tide came in. We were able to ID her based on an eye patch photo that was uploaded to the internet by my colleagues Gary Sutton and Tasley Shaw while I was en route to Zeballos, and they were able to see that this was T109A3, and a very well-known individual, seen over 100 times since she was born 15 years ago, very well known from all around Vancouver Island, including her most previous encounter was only a week before she stranded here off Defino with her kid. It was only a 2.5-year-old baby. And so this baby was unfortunately without a mom, well-known baby, seen 39 times since it was born in 2022. And we just watched it swim around its dead mom's body, very, very upset, maybe a bit unsure of exactly what to do, as you might imagine. And so I got the drone up at slack tide, high slack, shortly after I was on scene, and I was filming how it was behaving in the shallows. And it settled down a little bit at slack tide because the current stopped running, and this little whale started navigating the shallows and went through this very shallow channel, only about 6 feet deep or so, and it was just kind of carrying along, exploring a little bit, and unfortunately she popped right out into the lagoon behind this sandbar, which is separated from open waters by tidal rapids and a very shallow channel, again, that can only be passed at high tide. And once she was in this deep water area, which is a couple miles long and about a third of a mile wide, it's very deep, about 150 feet in the center, she just took off. And given what I know about entrapments, I didn't think she would be back to this shallow water area anytime soon. And I was unfortunately right. We kind of hoped she might come back at high slack the next day, but she was nowhere near that part of the lagoon. This is a drone photo showing that narrow channel she went through. There's this dark strip of water at the bottom of the frame. A larger body of water to the right with a lot of current, and that's passable at high tide only. And this basin of water in the middle here, just to the bottom of the screen from the tidal rapids, and then another channel out into the inlet. So we had our work cut out for us. The first thing we did, because we figured we had such success with playback experiments, that we had a recording of her great aunt, and we decided to play that back. And you probably can't hear the video, but this is my colleagues, Gary Sutton and James Pilkington and I doing a playback experiment. That was just the sound of the calls. If you can hear them, you might not be able to. But unfortunately, we had the opposite response we were hoping for. Instead of being an attractant, this was a deterrent. And that's why they're called playback experiments, because we have no idea what these calls are saying or how the animals are going to interpret them. So we got to work building a hukilau using a bunch of floats that I've found in the ocean over the years and I've been collecting. And we got that out and used some boats with okumi pipes. And these pipes make a loud sound underwater. And they seem to work to drive the whale to the right end of the lagoon a little bit. But then we put the hukilau out, and then the whale just swam through the hukilau and right past the okumi pipes back into the other end of the lagoon. So Because we were in a Hadasat First Nation territory and Nuchatlet First Nation territory, and they were very much allowing us to be there and concerned with the fate of kʷiisaḥiʔis, also known as T109A3A, or the translation for kʷiisaḥiʔis from Nuchatlet to English is brave little hunter. And they got out on the water, attempted some feeding, attempted some leading. She took a bit of an interest in the canoe, but she didn't follow it to the other end of the lagoon. So we started monitoring this whale. I was making a lot of distress calls to the point where we again had to turn the hydrophone off sometimes. And so we just photographed this whale and monitored her condition. We noticed her skin began to deteriorate after a couple of weeks. She was still in pretty good body condition otherwise, but there was a large freshwater component in the lagoon she was in, which was not doing her skin any favors. So we figured one of the only things we could do is try to capture her using more aggressive techniques and then place her back out in the open water. I didn't know if this was going to work or not. It seemed a bit far-fetched, but we built the world's largest hukilau. It was about 1,700 feet long, and we used several thousand feet of rope because each one of our strands was 3 feet apart and was 60 feet long, and we had hundreds of those. And we set it out one day, and we had this crane truck ready with other nets, with the crane as well as a transportation truck, and we had a barge on standby, which was going to take her out into open water. This massive hukilau, we got her on the right side of it, and then she just swam through it like no big deal. So we just had to go back to monitoring, and unfortunately she started to lose body mass. She didn't have a full peanut head, but she was definitely on her way. She might have been feeding on the odd thing here or there, but there wasn't much in the way of food in the lagoon. So Rob John from the Nuchatlet First Nation started attempting to feed her again. He said he tried a couple other times, but she was so afraid of the boat because of all the other action on the water that he'd had no success. But there'd been several days since our last attempt, and so we'd been talking about building trust with the animal, and Rob really did that. And this was the first successful feeding attempt. I happened to have a drone up that day as it was happening, and she approached the food very warily. She ended up mouthing some of it and investigating it for quite some time before taking it down and eating it. And on this first day, she wouldn't eat anything that didn't have skin or fur attached to it. And eventually, she got into the blubber and the meat and anything, because that trust relationship had been built, and she was eating a lot of meat. Rob, because he was able to collect prey under First Nations food and ceremonial purposes permits, he collected a 600-pound California sea lion and used that a few days later to lure her right through the narrows, right to the side of the bridge. And by the time they got to the bridge, the tide was running so hard, she was really hesitant to pass through the tidal narrows. And we waited and waited, and hours went by. It started getting dark. kʷiisaḥiʔis started getting frustrated, was breaching a lot. She was protesting that the vessel would leave and go onto the other side of the bridge. And she was getting pretty cranky with that, doing lots of breaching and tail slapping. And yeah, and then it got dark, and they were still trying to get her through, and she just wouldn't do it. She would go into the narrows and then turn around, swim back out. She was a bit too scared. So we packed it in for the night, went back to the hotel. We got about an hour of sleep, came back at high slack at 3 a.m. and she was gone. And so we jumped in the Merlin, the Cetology and DFO's research boat that I run. And you can see the tidal lagoon here on the left, where she had been for, at this point, over 5 weeks. The bridge is at the bottom of the screen in this little brown area. And this is another almost fully enclosed inlet that she was into, and now, free, quote unquote. But when we tried to guide her through the exit channel there in the moonlight that morning, she wouldn't have anything to do with it. So we had to get Rob back out on the water with the little dinghy. And we cut up another probably 100 pounds of California sea lion meat and went out. And yeah, all it took was getting Rob out along with Nicolette and Ashley in the Zodiac. And every time she surfaced, they'd throw another piece of meat in front of the boat, and that kept her mind off of that other exit channel that she had to pass through. It was quite narrow, lots of kelp in it, and yeah, and it took 3 tries to get her through there, but then we had success. She was finally free, April 26th, 2024, and that was the last time I saw her. And this is the point where I want to introduce FinWave, because FinWave is a new technology that really helps us keep track of these individuals. And when it comes to things like responding to a stranding or an entrapment and having success, you want to know the survival of that individual. And you can't do that with photo identification. Tagging these whales is just not an option. Killer whales die from tags, and I've seen it firsthand, unfortunately. And it's just not worth it. So we have better ways to track them using photo identification, a very passive technique by comparison. So FinWave allows us to have data contributors up and down the coast submit their photos of killer whales or anything that FinWave is being used for with a dorsal fin. And we have a big killer whale page on the platform. We also have southern residents. We have South African broodies whales, Brazilian bottlenose dolphins, and more populations coming online all the time. For the big killer whale page, we have almost 400 contributors, lots of encounters, over 5,000 encounters now, and over 250,000 images. All it really takes is people who want to contribute, throwing their photos in, putting in the date and location, and hitting submit. And this is a screenshot of just some of the recent encounters coastwide, and including some of kʷiisaḥiʔis's family, the T109s, and a bunch of other whales just up and down the coast from a variety of different people. All data are queryable. Let's just look at where most of the encounters are coming from around Vancouver Island, but lots of people in Alaska and even California and in Oregon, and Haida submitting data from time to time. As far as the ID work goes, it also expedites this process because of the model that we've built to automatically recognize individuals in this population, which it can do with pretty high accuracy, especially for adults. In this case, correctly identifying a very nondescript female T137B and her mom T137, not knowing what to suggest for a seabird, in this case a rhinoceros auklet, but correctly identifying T36B1, which is always good to see accurate predictions. So that just really helps expedite the ID process. There's always an up-to-date photo ID catalog with the most recent photographs of every individual, and a profile page for every individual showing its sex and age and who it likes to travel with, all the recent encounters, and a distribution map. So when it comes to kʷiisaḥiʔis and FinWave, we've managed to track her family in real time, practically up and down the coast since April when kʷiisaḥiʔis got out. And what we found is that without surprise, they spend a lot of time off the west side of Vancouver Island in the summer. And they've also spent a lot of time off the Victoria area. I've seen them in Alert Bay a couple occasions, including once after this map was made a few weeks ago, and out in Queen Charlotte Sound, Haida right up in Southeast Alaska. So what this map is telling us, especially considering Brave Little Hunter, or kʷiisaḥiʔis, is remaining in the same area where she found her freedom again, is that she's being passed by other killer whales quite regularly, and may be temporarily meeting up with them, or she may be afraid to meet up with them. In any case, she seems to be holding her own, which is amazing considering she's 2.5 years old, and she's definitely managing to feed herself, or others are helping feed her when they're temporarily associating. But she hasn't, so far as we know, met up with her family yet. So our fingers are crossed on that, and we just are feeling a lot of gratitude to be able to conduct this work and have so much help up and down the coast for all the people contributing sightings and making contributions to help run this program, because technology is expensive to run. So some of the implications of transitioning to artificial intelligence when it comes to working with the data of this population, at least for us, is that it expedites our workflow by about 200%, which is awesome. It enables remote work. My entire team used to work here in Alert Bay with me, but now they're all working from home in Victoria and Cowichan and in Vancouver, and which is kind of cool. It encourages more data. We're getting more data contributors than we've ever had, which is wonderful to have high resolution data of these animals. And it facilitates studies because this data is more or less open access. So a lot of collaborative and independent studies can come from this. External implications are that it provides real-time cataloging and demographic data, which everyone is always wanting, especially whale watch naturalists, other scientists working with this population. It's all real-time updates now. Unlike giving your data and you're posting your photos on something like Facebook, where your ownership really becomes part of the public domain, or at least owned by Meta at that point, your photographs are protected under licenses of your choice when you submit your data to FinWave. It facilitates education, stewardship, and conservation by getting people up to date with this population and more intimate with their knowledge of it. And of course, it facilitates studies, which is something that can be done collaboratively or independently. So that's just a brief overview of some of the work I've been involved in, helping save a few individuals in this population, which is considered threatened in Canada here. And also some of the work I'm doing just to keep monitoring them with the help of so many people up and down the coast. So with that, I just want to thank you all for watching. And I have to go through this list and voice my thanks to Fisheries and Oceans Canada for supporting it for so long. Oceanwise, NIMSA, Eagle Wing Tours, and Frederick Alexander University for all their support on FinWave, and all the other organizations which have helped with the responses to these killer whales. All the images in this presentation are my own unless otherwise stated or credited. And yeah, no data can be shared or copied without my permission. If you'd like to follow us, you can follow Cetology on X, on Facebook and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, JT Coastal on Instagram. But check out our website, cetology.org. You can contribute to our work there. And if you want to get in touch about anything, just don't hesitate to reach out at info@cetology.org. So with that, I'm happy to answer some questions if there are any, and I'll give it back to Susan here and stop screen sharing.
And I'm gonna hand it over to Wade, who's been collecting questions, and wow.
Yeah, you got it.
Fantastic talk. Thank you for sharing all that. I'm taking it all in.
Cool. Thanks, Susan. And yeah, thank you so much, Jared, for a fantastic presentation. I think the first question, and we've gotten this in a few different ways, I guess is generally like, how did the entrapments happen? I mean, like kind of in the first place, like orcas are such great navigators. Is there a reason why they, go in there and don't leave? Are they afraid of going back out? Is there something with the acoustics in the narrow passage that make things difficult? Can you just kind of elaborate a little bit there?
Yeah, it's the ongoing question. We don't really know what's going on, except that big killer whales especially love to hunt in shallow areas. This is why they also get a lot more live strandings than resident killer whales or offshore killer whales on this coast, for example. But big killer whales in particular go into lots of little nooks and crannies on the coast. And once they get in there in these kind of landlocked basins, we're not quite sure why they can't get out. But in some cases, killer whales have died when they've been entrapped. And so it really necessitates response. I think that, yeah, we did kind of try and get into that in our paper about entrapments in 2021, of which I was a co-author on, the project led by Ev Jourdain. But we didn't go into too much detail because we don't really know why. You can call it an entrapment, but it's different than an ice entrapment. When killer whales get entrapped in ice, they really can't get out unless they break through it or they swim a long way to open water. But in these cases, the killer whales can get out the same way they get in. It's just that they've either forgotten how or they just they can't remember, or there's something about the acoustics, or the tide's not right. But it's an interesting phenomenon.
Makes sense. Thank you. And then there was one clarifying question on Brave Little Hunter specifically. So I think there was at one point you mentioned that she hasn't been seen since she left the inlet in April, and then there was a confirmed sighting in July. So I don't know if you have any clarification there, or if it was if there was a misspeak or something.
Oh yeah, in the map that I showed, there's a variety of possible, probable, and confirmed sightings, right from May up until August. And the reason why there's possible and probable sightings is because we just don't have good enough photos of those encounters to verify it. But they're very, very likely, especially the probable ones. I've looked at the photos and video, and can almost say without a doubt that it's the whale, but we don't confirm a sighting or call it positive unless we've got a good photo of the dorsal fin saddle patch or eye patch. But it's very strange to have a young killer whale traveling around by itself. And most of those sightings were of exactly that, with some video or some distant photos or something.
Makes sense. And I guess a similar question. I think on that map, somebody was having a hard time seeing when the latest confirmed sighting was. Can you point to when that was?
Yeah, the latest confirmed sighting, there was some possible sightings in August, and the latest confirmed sighting was in July. There was confirmed. Sorry. Yeah, there was confirmed sighting in July as well as in May. And there was no sightings in June. I was starting to get worried in June. I'm not gonna lie. And then she showed up in July with a couple sightings, one of which was confirmed, and the other one which was pretty close to confirmed. I just called it probable because she was a bit too distant in the video to be sure.
Awesome. Makes sense. And yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
and then a couple, I guess one kind of definition point. You mentioned that towards the beginning, the chronic noise in the lagoon. Can you just kind of define what that chronic noise is? Is that just like the amount of boat traffic that's there? Can you just kind of elaborate on that a bit?
Chronic noise. There's probably very little chronic noise in some of these lagoons, other than just the input from the streams or runoff or rivers that may be feeding them, or the outflow of the tide. Any little creatures that live in there, but all natural sounds. What I meant by chronic noise in the beginning of the presentation was just that, at least in the Salish Sea, where there's a lot of Bigg's killer whales from time to time, or at least actually almost every day of the year, there's Bigg's killer whales in there. There's also a lot of noise from shipping traffic and just anthropogenic noise sources. So that really is a chronic threat because it's just there's a lot of man-made noise in that environment almost all the time. It's chronic.
Got it. Makes sense. Cool. And sorry for jumping around a little bit. We have some questions all over the map. But
No
there was
problem.
one specifically on T10983. In the photos on her pectoral fin, it looks like there's a scar. Somebody suggested that maybe it's a form of congenital, like a abnormality, like dolphins with thumbs. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's much more likely that it's much more like a nick on the dorsal fin. When you look at the tails, the dorsal fins, or the pectoral fins, really any appendage of killer whales, you often see nicks. And these are made by the teeth of other killer whales. And so I did see that in the pec too. And she also had some good scars on her tail, or at least some good nicks on her tail, which I don't think were congenital. Most killer whales get these nicks when they're juveniles, and so by the time they're adults, they're really well healed. And I think that was probably the case with that pectoral fin.
Awesome, thank you. And then one on kind of your interactions with other folks up there. So, what can you kind of comment on how commercial and tourist whale watching companies, like if they support your work, how if they help you with pictures from their trips, like are you pretty well engaged with those folks?
In this part of the world, yes, we have a variety of different whale watch companies signed on as organizations to FinWave, and their naturalists are submitting photos regularly, which is wonderful. It really is the naturalists on whale watch boats in this part of the world that know these animals the best. I don't work in the whale watch industry, but I spend a lot of time with Bigg's killer whales. But I'm always amazed at how intimate the knowledge of some of the folks working on whale watch boats out of Vancouver and Victoria and the San Juan Islands and the Southern Gulf Islands have of these different matrilines, because they're seeing them so much. So we really want FinWave to encapsulate that intimate knowledge of these whales, how much they're spending time with their families, how they change in appearance over the years. And so we're very grateful to all the naturalists out there that are submitting photos. And the North Island Marine Mammal Stewardship Association is been supporting our work. That's an association of tourism operators, and also Eagle Wing Tours has been making annual contributions, which has very much made this work possible as well. So in addition to Fisheries and Oceans Canada and Ocean Wise, yeah, it's really kind of a multi-pronged approach to making this work for everybody, because we're all very concerned and interested in these whales.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And then one on I guess whale behavior in relation to your activities. Have you noticed the orcas kind of reacting to your drones or anything like that? Has there been a kind of meaningful change in behavior?
Yeah, and I should elaborate too, at least insofar as California and the outer coast of the US is concerned, because, at least other than Washington, and because I want to highlight that these whales that are on FinWave, including these individuals that I was just speaking about being entrapped, they do turn up in California from time to time, and Oregon and Washington, and this is all one big population from Southern California right up to southeastern Alaska, and so these animals all have shared habitat, and it's especially interesting to get more encounters from the California and Oregon area. So if anyone's out there on the water and wants to contribute, and they're not already on FinWave, just send an email and I'll get you hooked up with an invitation. But as far as your question is concerned, your most recent one, drones and vessel traffic, certainly drones I think are a much less impactful way to study these whales, as opposed to getting close with the boat all the time. You're not having as much of an acoustic impact on their behavior with the drone. But having said that, I've flown above killer whales many times and find that they do respond to the drone when it's calm water. And maybe it just takes them a little bit of habituation until they're actually used to the drone over several encounters on several days before they relax. But at least the first few times, I've noticed killer whales don't really like it. You can fly over a humpback any day and they don't care, as long as you're 20, 30 meters up. But killer whales is a different story altogether.
Great, thank you. And then I guess going back to you're just mentioning FinWave, and there were a few questions on that. Do you think that's kind of the best way forward as far as tracking a population that can kind of look so drastically every 5 years or so, like Bigg?
Yeah, I think it's actually the only way forward. I mean, if we don't start using the technology we have to, to the best of our ability, then I think we're going to fall behind, because, our interest in whales and our spread, thanks to our technology over coastal waters and the oceans, is just increasing and increasing, and we're discovering more and more every year. Without ways to manage these large data sets, we're really going to rely on a lot of human power and a lot of funding or volunteer effort to keep on top of it. And if we don't have that, we lose a lot of knowledge and the ability to make informed decisions when it comes to managing these populations, or just coexisting with them and managing our own activities, more importantly. So I think that the train has left the station, and if you're not using artificial intelligence to the best of its ability moving forward, you'll probably get left behind as far as data collection and data curation is concerned. So we're trying to we're basically taking all of our historic data and putting it into the system so that it's an all-in-one. We've got data backloaded to 2011, but in time we'll hope to get it all backloaded onto the system.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a much better way to be tracking than the incumbent technology,
Yeah.
if you can call it that. And then you mentioned at one point the physical tagging of the whales can be kind of detrimental to them. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, well, at least as far as West Coast transient killer whales, in the big killer whale ecotype, there was a number of them tagged in this population back in the 2000s. There's a couple females with tag hardware still in their bodies. They've survived that. I'm not sure they gave any consent for those tags to be applied. And I often find when I'm trying to biopsy killer whales, they take off, and then they're not giving your consent at that time. But if you just kind of sneak in and get the odd shot away, especially when they're foraging, they don't seem too concerned. But those tags, we did see an infected tag wound on T99A, and then she completely disappeared. She was a healthy young adult female. The tag fell out, the wound got infected, and she disappeared right in the, just shy of the prime of her life. Another killer whale disappeared from this population shortly after being tagged. And then, of course, we know that one of the southern residents that was tagged also died from an infection. And there was some concern whether or not that tag was not sterile, but you got to remember that these tags are entering the water before they hit the whale on every occasion, because these whales are covered in a thin sheen of water, even when they're surfacing. And that those tags create holes which you can have water ingress from. So, even if the tag's sterile, over time, it's not a sterile situation, and that can lead to an infection and death. And in most cases, these whales survive, but just like us, some people are better able to heal than others, and if you get a cut, you can die from it eventually if it's not sanitary, or you can heal up okay. And I think it's a bit too risky to go around and using that technology on these animals we all know so well.
Absolutely. And I guess on a similarly sad topic, can you elaborate a little bit more on the extended impact that you might have seen on the skin of the whale that was in prolonged fresh water for too long?
Yeah, so she eventually ended up losing all of the black on her body, because that top layer of skin seemed to have just deteriorated completely. We watched it deteriorate over the course of about 48 hours. It just started, and the next day it was patchy, and the next day after that, her entire body was white-ish. And since then, at least in the photos that I've seen of this whale, she doesn't seem so white. So she could be, getting that top layer of skin back, which would be great and not surprising. But yeah, we know that this whale was doing really long dives when she was entrapped, and she was probably going down below the freshwater layer because it may have felt better down there. She was surpassing aerobic dive limit. She was down for 11 minutes at times, and then coming up to the surface just for a little bit and going back down for 9 or 10 minutes, and probably trying to spend as much time in that saltwater layer as possible, because her skin was in such bad condition.
Makes sense. And I guess one on do Bigg orcas on the kind of in the West Coast transient community, do they have their own family signature calls like the resident orcas do?
They probably do, but it's almost undetectable by the human ear. It may more be like voices. Every animal has its own voice, not necessarily its own dialect. But yeah, you'll see whales in this population hear other whales and completely ignore them sometimes, and on other times you'll see them hearing other whales and porpoise off in the directions of each other to meet up. So they have their social circles, just like we do, and they can probably have so many individuals in their social circles. They're not afraid to meet other whales, but they seem to have their preferred travel companions.
Awesome. And I'll try to only get to a few more. I know there's a lot of questions here, and I've been already peppering you here for like 20 minutes. But I guess before I do that, we've had a few questions come in over the past few minutes about where folks can learn more about potential volunteer opportunities related to FinWave or any other projects that you're working on. Is there any plugs that you can give for that?
Yeah, I actually get a lot of emails asking for internships or students or volunteers. Um, at this point, I don't d- I encourage anybody to reach out and offer their support, but we don't have a large volunteer network at this point. In part because it takes a lot of work to manage a project and get volunteers trained up and things. I'd certainly love to utilize everyone's help who'd like to be helpful in the future through FinWave or even just having people on site here. But we're just not set up for it yet. That said, I will definitely utilize help in the future, especially people with different skill sets. We need coders familiar with different coding languages, Python, C++, a number of other things, and also people that are really interested in helping manage the populations on FinWave, population experts or administrators who are willing to go through and confirm algorithm detections if they're very familiar with those whales. And yeah, and that's something that we could definitely utilize in the future.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, hopefully we get some good computer scientists in the chat volunteering their efforts.
Yeah.
And I guess similarly on FinWave, is the goal for this to be a community science site, kind of like the Happy Whale model? They also kind of accept killer whale uploads. Would it be beneficial to upload those encounters to both sites to contribute to as much data as possible?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for the big killer whales, at least so far as FinWave is concerned, you're contributing to a large master database, which is being worked on and carried forward through different regime shifts over the last 50 years. Um, and FinWave is really only for animals with fins. It can be used for sharks, and it's also a tool for population managers. Me personally, I won't administrate anything other than the Bigg killer whale page, but anybody can come along. We have population administrators uploading their entire data sets of different species and populations to FinWave, because not only is it something for the community and the public to get involved in, but it's also a tool for expediting photo ID identification data workflow for population biologists and photo ID managers. So yeah, that's a little bit different than the Happy Whale model. And because we don't own these data, FinWave is just a platform to make it accessible. It's more like the eBird model, actually, in the sense that everybody has their own account and their own data, and can see everybody else's data and export everybody else's data as long as those people allow it to be exported through their upload permissions. So if anyone's familiar with eBird, it's kind of been inspired by eBird, and we'll just take it as far as people want to go with it. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, there's a few outstanding questions, but I think I'll let you go there. I know it's been quite a while of back and forth here, and thank you so much for sharing all of your stories and your insight. What a fantastic presentation. I'll hand it back over to Susan. I'm sure she's got some closing thoughts here.
Yeah,
Okay.
well,
Thank you, Wade.
we'll learn more about the huskilaus at your next presentation,
Mhm.
Jared.
Sure.
Yeah, anyway, no, I think we'll be posting the recording, and we can send you the chat. Everybody's just very thankful for your work, as are we, and it was great to have you share it with us on this Tuesday night in September. So here's to Brave Little Hunter, and say the indigenous or the tribal nation name for Brave Little Hunter one more time.
Sure. Yeah. The new chatlet name for Brave Little Hunter is kʷiisaḥiʔis. kʷiisaḥiʔis. We had a community meeting in Zeballos where we were all taught how to say it, and the children were being handed $5 bills to say it. So it's yeah, you have to verbalize it to get it and carry it forward. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
kʷiisaḥiʔis. Thank you. See everyone in October. Bye-bye.
Bye.